Hello and welcome to today's event, Extending Rubrik Zero Trust Data Security to Your AWS Environments. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar today. This event is brought to you in part by thanks to our friends at Rubrik and AWS. And of course, thank you to the Actual Tech Media audience for joining us on the webinar today. We've got a really cool event lined up for you. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the webinar today. First off, I should mention my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. As always with our events here, we want these to be educational. We know how tough it can be out there in the world of enterprise IT, and we want to help you to solve your technology challenges. So we encourage your questions there in the questions pane of your audience console, and we'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation today. So keep those questions coming throughout. We even have a best question prize to help encourage your questions. I'll talk about that more here in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find 3 different resources you can download on accelerating application delivery on AWS and Rubrik, Rubrik for Amazon Web Services, and Rubrik AWS Customer Lookbook. Some really cool resources. I encourage you to download those now, and you can check them out after the webinar. At the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab of your audience console. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our best question prize for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. Of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into that prize drawing and meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that, I'm excited now to bring in our 3 expert presenters. Welcome, Kev Johnson, Technical Marketing Architect at Rubrik, Mike Preston, Senior Developer Advocate at Rubrik, and Peter Emming, Senior Product Manager at Amazon for S3. Kev, Mike, and Peter, it's great to have you on the event. Before we get started, we're going to kick it off first here with a quick poll question. The question for everyone out there in the audience is, how do you currently keep archive copies of your backup data? And this is a single select question here. Select the option that corresponds to you and your organization. I will share the results here in just a moment before I hand it off to our first presenter. All right, it looks like the leader here is archive to cloud at 41%. Followed by second place, archive to on-prem file store, and then third place, archive to tape. All right, interesting results. Thank you everyone for sharing your feedback on that. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Kev. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Some really interesting stuff in there. Obviously, some folks already archiving their data out to cloud-based storage. And we're here today really to show you how Rubrik can make it much, much easier to do this, and also to really secure that using native immutability. So, one of the things I really want to talk about is about modern data protection, really, the challenges that organizations have. And, you know, there's a fair few of them. I spent a good portion of my career working in consultancy, working as a sysadmin, and I know how difficult it can be. So often you have a dedicated backup team, and that's great. But then, you know, your dedicated backup team don't really know the application. So you've got the challenges of things like unstructured data. You've got applications that just don't get protected because applications teams don't speak to backup teams, all of these kinds of things. You waste a lot of time just managing all of this data to make sure it's protected. And the big challenge there then is, how do you prove that you can recover that data? So I really like this image because I really like to put my hoodie up and pretend that I'm a hacker. I'm not a hacker. I would be a terrible hacker. But just to kind of set the landscape for you, this data is from the very end of last year, so it should be pretty much up to date. It's less than a month old. But in a report by Cybersecurity Ventures, damages from cybercrime expected to hit $6 trillion this year. So that was in 2021. $6 trillion is a phenomenal amount of money. It would be the single largest business opportunity in the world, far larger than illegal drugs, all of that kind of stuff. If we have a look at where the ransomware attacks are happening, this website here, blackfog.com, they put out a report every month detailing ransomware attacks that have been made public. So it doesn't cover everything, because obviously not everybody wants to declare that they've been a victim of ransomware. Over the course of the year, it's been really interesting to watch how how things have trended. And back in the beginning of the year, it was very, people were being very, very focused on government. And as the year's gone on, healthcare's had a bit of a whack, education, technology companies. It's pretty much across the board now. So it's much less the case that your central government, you're going to be a target. They're going for everyone. And also attacks by country. This really amazed me, actually. The USA is basically the target of 50% of ransomware attacks globally in 2021. After that, you've got the UK, so where I am, much smaller slices, but the US does seem to be heavily targeted, maybe because that's where people see the money as being the opportunities. And again, if we look at the breakdown of ransomware attacks by month, so we can compare against what happened in 2020, where we saw a fairly significant rise. If you look in October 2020, we saw significant numbers of ransomware attacks. At the same time, last year, we saw a bit of a lull, but we're seeing those numbers creeping back up again. And again, these are all publicly declared. So you can go to that website, you can see exactly which businesses were targeted, what the impact was. It's definitely worth spending 5-10 minutes of your time looking into. And when we start talking about ransomware, it's a bit of a if you turn on the TV, you see on the news ransomware, and there's a number of different things that happen when we call something a ransomware attack. The two main focuses are ransomware, whereby we're seeing mass deletions of data. This is typically the stuff that we see whereby an attacker gains a foothold, and once they gain that foothold, they will, they'll sit there inside your network. They'll check what's going on, and then they'll identify where you're protecting your data to, and then they'll attack that backup platform first. They're going to delete that stuff, or potentially they might re-encrypt that stuff. So you've now got garbage data because you can't decrypt it. And these are the two main challenges that we see. So they're most likely when technical maintenance is behind schedule. And over the last 2 years, clearly there's been coronavirus. Everyone's been kind of really stretched, working from home. People can't get into the office. All of these kinds of challenges. We see risky employee behavior. So people might be tempted to just click on a link that they previously, maybe wouldn't have done if they were in the office, if they had IT security standing over them. And generally a security strategy that isn't prepared for the kinds of attacks that are coming. And these attacks are changing, constantly. So just because you read a book about ransomware 2 years ago, the landscape has completely changed. And these are the kind of areas where we really, really see challenges. And on that note, I'm just going to pass back across to David. I think we've got the next poll question.
Absolutely. Yeah. The next poll on the screen is, what's your biggest concern when it comes to securing backup data? And I'll let everyone respond to that there and give you just a moment. Some really scary statistics happening around ransomware, a lot to be concerned about. And I think I'm already seeing a trend here on this poll. All right, looks like if I share the results, almost 60% really say ransomware is their number one concern when it comes to securing backup data. Great presentation. Kev, I'm excited now to hand it off to our next presenter. Mike, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, David. So, hopefully Kev didn't scare you too much. If you're still not scared, though, I'm going to scare you a little bit more, and then we'll get into the portion where how Rubrik can help you out with some of this stuff. So yeah, to keep on sort of the scaring tactics here, if we look at sort of a traditional architecture, we see all these things that they're made up of, right? We got proxies, servers, catalogs, and then obviously our production network. So this is sort of the legacy architecture that, that's been around for the last, 20 years, hasn't really changed too much. And the problem here is when ransomware hits, it not only goes after production, but it can actually take out, all that infrastructure that your backup solution needs in order to function correctly. And then on top of that, if it's using sort of open storage protocols to store data, there's no air gap, there's none of that type of stuff. Next thing we know, our whole traditional architecture, including the backups, is kind of pooched here, right? So that kind of leaves us in a bad situation. Well, thankfully, when we get to sort of how Rubrik works, different. So first of all, our storage is not accessible over standard protocols. So all data that goes, in and out of Rubrik always goes through, our APIs and then into our custom built file system. And it's really this custom built file system which powers our immutability. And we've been like this since, the very first version of the product has provided an immutable solution. So what that means is once the backups are written into Rubrik, we're not able to modify or change or encrypt these at all. And then thirdly, we also have to employ all those standard sort of security features, things like multi-factor authentication, certificate-based authentication, TLS and whatnot. So all, traffic in and out of the Rubrik cluster, as well as traffic, within the Rubrik cluster is always encrypted via TLS. And there's really like a trust no one or nothing approach in terms of this. And basically what this means is, we can always use our backups for what they're intended to be, right? The last line of defense. The last thing you want to do is go to recover from some crazy, scary ransomware attack and then realize that, my backups are all encrypted as well. So this is sort of the core of Rubrik's zero trust architecture. And I really want to now take a look at the platform as a whole, because this core that I just spoke about really powers, everything within our entire platform. So the first thing being is zero trust data protection, right? This is what we're best known for. It's the backup portion of the platform. It's the portion that automates, the discovery of all of the data and applications within our environment, and basically ensures that everything's protected. So this is mostly powered by what we call an SLA domain. And an SLA domain is essentially a policy that you set up that contains things like, how often do you want to back up? How long do you want to keep those backups around? Do we need to archive any of them or age them out after a certain amount of time? And do we want to replicate them to maybe another location for DR purposes? So this is really like, the core. You take this policies and then you just go assign it to your workloads, right? Your SQL servers, your Windows servers, your virtual machines, doesn't matter what it is. You assign those policies to it, and Rubrik basically picks up and automates and does all of the rest for you, ensuring that everything adheres to those constructs. So the second piece, and we're talking about ransomware a lot here, and these are going to probably be the more applicable pieces for today, is things like our Ransomware Investigation service. So not only do we back up data, but as we back that up, we generate a multitude of metadata around what's within those backups, what's within those snapshots. So all of this to a couple of different machine learning algorithms. And from there, our ransomware investigation service can alert and detect on anomalies. So think of things like a large number of files were added or deleted, modified. It'll even detect encryption. So this greatly speeds up, the amount of time that, or greatly decreases the amount of time that it's going to take you to somewhat determine that blast radius. Because once ransomware hits, the craziest thing you need to do is figure out how far is this spread, and that's what our ransomware investigation service will help you with. The next thing is, once we understand what data has been affected, we really need to know, what that data was. Was it sensitive in nature? And this is where our sensitive data discovery service comes in. So again, that metadata is utilized, and we can scan and we can pinpoint exactly, what lies within that data. So you can, understand, what pieces of your infrastructure are compliant or not compliant around things like PCI or HIPAA or any custom built sort of regex that you want to build to sort of get a deeper understanding of what data has been affected. Then we have our incident containment service. So this is our newest service, which has basically just been announced. So essentially what this does is allows you to sort of pause all the access and activities, in the event that there's been some sort of compromise or threat. And basically, we could dive deep into all of the different snapshots and all of the different backups, and discover what's in there and essentially quarantine data within that. So when you go to restore back, you're not going to just simply restore or reinfect your environment when recovering. And then finally is our orchestrated application recovery. So while Rubrik gives you the ability to restore and everything, we also have this separate piece, which is sort of a disaster recovery play. So it allows us to recover post-attack using something that we call application blueprints. So a blueprint is really like the instructions is how I want to recover. I need to recover all these services in this certain order. I want them to go to this location, and I need to run all sorts of different scripts and workflows, both pre and post recovery. And then, most all of these pillars, again, can be integrated with source solutions such as Palo Alto Networks Cortex, which really enables teams to restore operations from the last known clean copy in minutes or hours rather than days and weeks. So we're really starting to bridge the gap between a lot of IT operations and security teams, especially when it comes to ransomware recovery. And then finally, Rubrik meets the zero trust architecture security standards that have been set forth by, the US government as part of the National Institute for Securities and Technology, or the NIST framework. So with that, to the response of a ransomware attack with and without Rubrik. And really, we're going to start without, and this will hopefully help illustrate why we've put all the resources into our ransomware remediation and our immutability and all of that stuff. So this is kind of what we're seeing today from customers without Rubrik. So attackers basically get in, right, and they have a couple of options. Option one, we can pay the ransom. Nobody really wants to do that option, especially even though you do pay that ransom. There's often a time period which the hackers may or may not actually provide you a decryption key, and unlocking all of that encrypted data takes time as well. So a lot of times people say, well, I want option two, which is I'm going to recover, right? And to do this, we need to get, again, IT and SecOps together, because they need to work together on this stuff. And the first thing we need to look at, the first question we have to ask is, is our data okay? Did they encrypt our backups? Have we backed everything up, right? All of that different stuff. And then we can have to look at, do we understand exactly, what's been encrypted, what's been affected? Do I understand that blast radius, right? Do I have something that can show me anomalies and show me what applications have been affected? Third, we need to confront that possibility that if sensitive data has been exfiltrated, then we probably need to alert that to our legal teams or alert that to our customers, right? So can we discover what sensitive data has been affected? Can we contain those incidents, right? Can we scan in those backups? Are we confident enough that we're not just going to restore, the ransomware back into our environment and have it be reinfected again, sort of making us go through the process all over again? And then finally, how fast can we get back up and running, right? That's another important aspect. And, without Rubrik, or without the ability, I guess, to answer any one of these questions, if we say no to any of them, it almost always leads to pay the ransom, right? And again, we've just discussed why that's not always an ideal solution. Number one, money-wise, but number two, time-wise. So how does Rubrik sort of help solve these issues? So the first thing is, when it comes time to recover, Rubrik has those insights that allow your IT, your operations teams, and your SecOps teams to, sort of collaborate together with things like Palo Alto Networks XSOAR, which your security teams would probably be familiar with. So it really starts, with sort of that zero trust architecture. So we're already confident that our backups have been logically air-gapped, they're immutable, nothing's changed, we can then use the discover anomalies, again, the sensitive data discovery service to discover what type of data has been affected. And then Rubrik can work to find threats within the backups themselves, quarantine those compromised snapshots, and prevent reinfection. And then lastly, we have a number of different restoration methods, which will allow you to recover as quick as possible, whether it be down to a file level, maybe an in-place VM restore, which only copies, changed blocks. We have instant recovery or live mount, which let you leverage the Rubrik storage itself as a basically a data store and power the application from there. So we have a number of different methods to get back up and running. So it's really this core platform that I've discussed, the zero trust data security, that custom built file system that drives the entire process. But there's some challenges when it comes to storing data off of the Rubrik platform. And I want to kind of talk about that right now, because that's really where we're going to shift this presentation into. So our customers love Rubrik. They end up protecting a lot of data and workloads with it. And eventually what happens is they run into some capacity limits, right? Now, due to our scale out nature, this can be solved by simply purchasing more Rubrik, adding it to your cluster, and away you go, right? You've increased your capacity. But while we'd love to just continue to sell you Rubrik to solve this issue, the fact of the matter is, most of the data that you're storing is probably older. You're keeping maybe 5 years or 7 years around just for compliance reasons. And our customers want the ability to kind of get this data off-site as well. So we'll sell you as much Rubrik as you want, but there's better options for some of this older data. So what we have is the ability to archive out those older backups off-site, and they can really go to a number of places, right? The most we see is like an NFS store that's on-prem, or maybe AWS S3, right? So we could say in our SLA policies, we have backups. Once they hit 30 days, let's get them off Rubrik. Let's archive them up to cloud or archive them to another archive location. That way, we can free up space for the more recent backups that we're probably going to use. And probably AWS is one of the most used that we've seen due to its lower cost, and it's just robust. It's very easy to set up. And, this proves itself as Peter's told us that S3 is now hosting over 200 trillion objects, which is an insane amount of data. I don't even know how many zeros that is, but it's enough where we just write the word trillion rather than try and put all the zeros on the screen. So sort of while archiving's great capacity and save some money, it does present some more challenges. So it solves an issue and presents another. And I talked a lot about our immutability, and what I mean by that is when data is written, it can't be changed. This ensures that come recovery time, our backups are going to be there for us, right? They're going to be our last line of defense. So while backups are immutable, they're only immutable while they reside on that Rubrik platform, right? While they reside in our custom built file system. In terms of archive, once we archive that older data off, it no longer sits within Rubrik's file system. So the security and the immutability needs depend on the archive that your data is actually sitting on. So it actually presents a set of its own challenges. And in the case of AWS, not too long ago, we announced the ability within version 7 of Rubrik that will now support immutable archives within S3 utilizing a feature called ObjectLock. So that way you can have, all that great immutability no matter where your data lives, whether it be within Rubrik on-prem or archived up to AWS. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Peter Imming, the Senior Product Manager at AWS. He'll dive deeper into all this stuff. He is definitely way more better to talk about, S3 and ObjectLock itself, and then we'll jump into a demo and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you so
Thanks,
much, Mike.
David, I think you've got a poll question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's
Before
right.
we hand it off to Peter, just a quick poll question here for everyone out there in the audience. and that is, how long do you keep your oldest copy of backup data? Do you keep it less than 90 days, 90 to 180, or all the way up there to longer than 10 years? I'm sure there's some industries or sectors out there where they have regulatory requirements to keep their backup data for a long period of time. So I'm curious to find out the results of this poll. And while you're answering the poll, if you have a question on your mind about protecting your data with Rubrik or getting it offsite with AWS S3, don't forget about our questions pane. And we'll be doing our live Q&A session here coming up at the end of the event. So thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. Let me just share the results of this. And it looks like 38% said 3 to 10 years, 23% said longer than 10 years. So some very long backup archival requirements. Peter, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, David. So that is definitely interesting. I'm my product management team. I've been in the backup industry though for over 25 years. So some of these statistics, definitely not too surprising, but still always interesting. And I'll say that ransomware has been one of those kind of foundational changes and shifts in the backup industry that I've seen in the last 25 years. This is now the conversation that customers want to have, not only with backup partners like Rubrik, but also with us here at Amazon S3. And so Mike mentioned that NIST security framework and that set of standards for technology and for security. And at S3, that is really our job one. It's all about security. So while we have other solutions to go after some of the other areas of this framework, the one we're going to be talking about the most today is on the protection side, is really about that sense of confidence and that sense of security that your data can be stored safely in S3, that like Mike mentioned, the scale is always going to be there. You're not going to have to buy another storage array. You're not going to have to manage that, lifecycle it, patch it. This is something that we're going to be able to secure your data with and grow over time. And the way we do that is with a layered approach here. And when you look at this slide, it might be a little hard to read there on some of the text, but it's essentially a layered approach. There is no single silver bullet that's going to safely secure your data. It's all about building rings of defense, rings of security, and creating multiple layers of defense there. And that starts with our IAM policies, where we have a policy-driven access model to your data stored in S3 that can be then layered upon with a multi-factor authentication to require that essentially that dual factor authentication to make a change to the data. And we'll be focusing really here on this third one, all about the immutable storage and how you set up your data in S3 to really be immutable from any sort of tampering. Obviously, encryption will play a part of that. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then obviously, we provide a really robust logging environment for all of the changes that happen to your buckets and your objects in S3, those 200 trillion objects. Well, people want to know what is going on with that data. So we have a really robust logging system. And then obviously AWS, the physical security aspect, I think there was a question in the chat as well about this, is how do we know that that data in the cloud is going to be secure? Well, there's, again, multiple levels of security here, but one of the most kind of and largest differences between sort of that on-prem storage model and then what we do to operate and secure your data in S3 is that physical security. I can't access an S3 data center. I can't access an AWS data center. I can't physically access that data. So there is multiple layers of physical security as well as logical security that, again, all kind of meld together, kind of like layers of a cake that we use to stack and create these layers of defense. And so this is where we really, I think, have demonstrated that you should have confidence in being able to safely store that data in the cloud and a lot of you are from the poll results, and have that confidence that you're going to be able to recover that data when you need to. And when you look at the scale of S3, that's another kind of differentiator. You're not having to buy additional on-premise storage to scale out. You're not having to plan for that. Essentially with S3, you're getting virtually unlimited scale. If you look at the footprint, the physical footprint of our data center growth over the last several years, you can see we've got 26 launched regions with 8 more announced, over 84 availability zones. And then we've also introduced a highly durable storage model for S3, and that introduces also strong consistency on all your writes and all your reads after writes on S3. So it's, again, a layered approach, but that's what's led to the confidence of customers storing over 200 trillion objects in S3 And again, we're processing over 100 million requests to access that data in and out of S3 every second. So that's something that it's, when you think about it, just mind-boggling, coming from sort of an on-premise storage system to something like S3, where you don't have to worry about storage management in terms of when do I need to buy that next array, when do I need to upgrade it or lifecycle it. That's all taken care of for you by Amazon for S3 scale out. And the way we do that is through these multiple availability zones. And so when you look at how we physically store your data, you're always getting that redundancy. You're not having to set up multiple storage arrays and replicate between those storage arrays. You're having that all done for you automatically by S3 with our multi-AZ storage classes. And those storage classes are S3 standard, S3 infrequent access, and really almost all of our storage classes are going to be multi-AZ unless you specifically want us to store your data in a single zone storage class. And so this is something that, again, I think is another differentiator for that confidence to gain of storing your backup copies safely in S3. It's got 11 nines of durability, and you've got that 4 nines of storage availability, again, across those multiple availability zones that are going to be separated by multiple miles of geographic distance, where we're automatically storing at least 3 copies of those objects for you in these multi-AZ storage classes. Now, when we look at those AZs and those multiple storage classes here, the ones we're going to focus on today is really S3 standard and S3 standard and frequent access. And the reason why we're focusing on those is that's where the partnership with Rubrik has come in, where we're now able to set ObjectLock for immutable storage of your Rubrik snapshots in these 2 storage classes. And Rubrik has taken out all of the complexity about that and made it essentially almost a single checkbox to enable essentially a write once, read many storage architecture with those snapshots in S3. Those will be essentially undeletable, and we'll have a demo today to show you exactly how easy that is to set up and how easy it is to configure that through Rubrik directly without even having to go into the S3 console to create a bucket. Rubrik takes care of all of that for you, but I don't want to steal Mike's thunder. He's done a great job on that demo, and we're going to show you what that actually looks like. But we just wanted to show a little bit of the storage classes here for S3. You've got standard and frequent access for your most frequently accessed backups. But if you need to then store your copies for even a longer period of time based upon that poll question, many of you are, that's where Rubrik does support Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive. Now, we're not supporting immutable ObjectLock on those storage classes yet, but I'm sure Kev and Mike and the team at Rubrik, that's something that they'd love to hear from you about if that's something that you're interested in. Now, when we look at how ObjectLock works in S3, it's actually built on also kind of like that layered foundation of a cake that we talked about with multiple layers of safety. And so the first layer of safety for your data in S3, above and beyond just that multi-AZ architecture, is versioning. And so in order to take advantage of immutable storage in S3, the first feature that has to be enabled is bucket versioning. And this allows us to essentially have sort of an always append model to your objects. Instead of overwriting an object, we'll just create a new version. Instead of deleting an object physically out of S3, we'll just place a deletion marker on that object so that it's logically deleted, but not physically deleted. And so bucket versioning and object versioning is sort of that foundational layer to enable all of our data protection features in S3, everything from ObjectLock to our own object replication features. It all starts with versioning. And so that's the first capability that would be enabled automatically by Rubrik when we enable ObjectLock on your archival storage locations through Rubrik. So we'll show you what that looks like, but versioning is, again, that foundational piece. So if you're storing any data in S3, this is the feature that we always recommend the most here, is to enable versioning on your buckets. Now, when we look at how that then plays into ransomware, what does that sort of stack look like here? Well, obviously, ObjectLock is something that we've been talking about already, but what else goes in addition to just locking the storage and versioning the storage? Well, physical isolation is another piece. We talked about the physical security of AWS data centers. Well, there's additional logical security then on top of the physical security, which is our virtual private clouds, our direct connect and private link networking features, Route 53 to manage your domain names, and an AWS directory service if you need to take advantage of that. Now, we're not going to be talking about those today, but they are there to help you then physically and also logically isolate your data in AWS. Now, Mike mentioned also on the Rubrik side some of that machine learning that was going on to detect what's happening inside of your backups. The sort of partner to that solution that you would want to look at on the S3 side, it's not there to really do your ransomware investigation, but it gives you really for the first time a really good overview of what's going on with your S3 storage in terms of your storage consumption as well as the activity. It's called S3 Storage Lens. It's a free feature. It'll have 14 days of historical data ready to go that you can go and enable and see what's going on with a really nice, beautiful dashboard about what's going on with your S3 data, how many objects are encrypted, what's the growth rate look like, what's the activity look like. That's a new feature from us, and it's one that I love talking to customers about. So Mike, Kevin, I wanted to make sure we mentioned that it's a great companion to what you're seeing on the Rubrik side. So when we look at ObjectLock, we're really all about ingesting that data, applying the lock on those objects so that they cannot be overwritten, and then retaining that lock until you have that lock expire. You as the customer set that lock duration time, and we will retain it and keep it from a physical delete until that lock has expired. And then obviously the auditing side, S3 Storage Lens and CloudTrail are there from the S3 side, and then Rubrik and the CDM console are there from the Rubrik side to help you kind of understand the activity that's happening and taking place with your backup data. So when we look at sort of how the pieces fit together, that Rubrik CDM is going to take those backups. It's going to then process and send those to us over the network of your choice, whether it's something like a VPN or whether that's something coming in over the public internet. And that's going to go to S3 standard or standard and frequent access. And that lock will then be automatically applied, and we'll show you how to do that here in a moment. And then if you need to have that ultra long-term storage for archiving backups that you might not need to recover from very frequently, that's where our archive storage classes such as Glacier Deep Archive and Glacier Flexible Retrieval come in. So when we look at how this is going to work together, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to the Rubrik team here. They've done a great job, I think, in making interacting with S3 and enabling ObjectLock for immutable backup copies super easy. And we're going to show you a full demo here, but I just love showing the screenshot because I think it just shows the type of integration work that we've done together as partners. And I think it's really, really, really elegant, and that it's essentially a single checkbox here. So without stealing more of your thunder, Mike, let's get to your demo and actually see this in flight here and see kind of the whole process from start to finish.
Let's just dive right in here. Here we are on the main Rubrik dashboard, and what I'll walk through today is the complete end-to-end process of creating an S3 bucket that takes advantage of S3 Object Lock, and then configuring Rubrik to upload some snapshots to it so we can see that they are truly immutable. So the first thing we need to do is create an archive within Rubrik. So I'll head to the gear icon here and select Archival Locations. Now, adding an immutable archive is a bit different from the previous processes of adding archives within Rubrik. Previously, we had to first go into AWS and create the relevant roles and buckets in order to support the archive, and then attach that bucket to Rubrik. When we're creating an immutable archive, or an archive that supports S3 Object Lock, we aren't able to do so on an existing bucket. So the process is actually a bit more simplified, as Rubrik will go ahead and send all the appropriate API calls to AWS to create the bucket for us. So let's walk through that. I'll select the plus icon here to add a new archive, and we'll ensure that S3 is our archive type. We'll go ahead and select our preferred region, US East 1, and standard as our storage tier. Now I'll simply copy and paste some access and secret keys. Keep in mind here, the user who owns these keys will need to have all the appropriate permissions within AWS in order to create S3 buckets. Finally, we'll give our bucket a name, both in AWS and within Rubrik. Now, as far as encryption goes, we can see from the tooltip displayed that the encryption password method is the only supported method for S3 Object Lock at this moment. So we'll go ahead and select this, and we'll type in a secure password that we can use in order to encrypt the data that we plan on storing within AWS. So with that, let's select the advanced options, and we'll go ahead and we'll enable immutability on this archive. As you can see, we simply just need to toggle the feature on with a switch and then input our lock period. In this case, let's say 16 days. So as data is uploaded into this S3 bucket, it will remain locked and be unable to be modified for 16 days. We could see a few warnings here now letting us know that, hey, in order to gain some of this immutable functionality, your data is going to be locked up for a given amount of time, and we need to accept any associated costs with that. So I'll do that and click Save and then Add. So that's it. Rubrik will now go out, make those appropriate API calls out to AWS to configure the S3 bucket, enable S3 ObjectLock, and finally add it to our Rubrik instance as an archive. If we jump over to our AWS console and refresh our buckets, we can now see that our Rubrik M Preston ObjectLock bucket has been created. Drilling into this a little further, we can see that versioning has been enabled. This is a prerequisite in order to use the ObjectLock functionality. And we can also see that ObjectLock has been configured with a default retention period of the 16 days that we input. So with that, our next step is to create an SLA domain policy that takes advantage of this newly created archive. So we'll jump back into Rubrik, select SLA domains, then local domains, and then we'll click the plus icon to create a new one. Here, we'll give our SLA domain a name, and then input just how often we want to take our backups with this policy. For the sake of this demo, let's go ahead and take a backup every hour, and then we'll decide to keep those backups for, say, a day. I'll click Next, and we can go ahead and enable our archiving feature. I'll switch the toggle on, and then I'm going to enable a feature called Instant Archive. What this does is it sends the data up to the archive immediately after the backup has taken place. This will help speed up the process for us today, so we can actually have some S3 ObjectLock data in our bucket for this demo. So I'll go ahead and click Create, and our SLA domain is created for us within the Rubrik platform. With that, now we just need to assign some workloads to this policy. So I'll head to my vSphere VMs, do a quick filter for some of the VMs that I own. So let's go ahead and select this Linux instance that I have. I'll click Manage Protection, and here I can simply select our newly created SLA domain policy and click Next, then Submit. So with that, our VM is now assigned the SLA domain policy and will begin taking backups that adhere to all those subsequent constructs that we created within the policy. Now, through the magic of video, we can see that we already have a couple of backups when we drill in here that have taken place. And looking at the events, we can also see that they've been uploaded to our archival locations within AWS. So in essence, we shouldn't be able to delete these backups, but there's no fun in just saying that. No fun in just saying that these are immutable. Let's go ahead and see what happens as we run through maybe a couple different scenarios. First, imagine some rogue backup admin or insider threat that's gained access to the Rubrik platform and is looking to sabotage us by deleting our backups. So we can drill into the backups that we have here and go through the motions. So the first thing we need to do is actually remove the backup from the SLA policy. This will allow the delete option to actually be displayed. So to do this, we just change our retention on one of our backups here, and we'll set it to retain forever, and we'll give the screen a refresh. Now, if we select that same snapshot, we can see the delete option. So let's click that and see what happens. So we get first thing, we get a warning like, hey, this is going to permanently delete stuff. And then as we pass through this, an error, failed to delete the snapshot. So the backup is indeed protected by ObjectLock. If we jump into developer mode and try to do the same thing, we can see the actual message coming back from the API. It's basically saying, hey, this is protected by archival retention. You can't delete this. So we can't delete the backup data from within Rubrik, but any smart rogue admin is logically just going to log into AWS and try and delete it there as well. So let's go ahead and try that. We'll jump back into our console and navigate through our bucket directory here and look for some VMDK objects that we can delete. So I'm going to go ahead and select an object here and then click delete. And then of course, in true AWS fashion, we got to go ahead and confirm the delete by entering a certain passphrase. And as you can see, we immediately get an error message back from AWS that the object has failed to delete and access is denied. Now keep in mind, my account here is an administrator account within AWS, so I have some super user access here, yet I still can't delete that backup, and that's because it's locked for that certain amount of time. So hopefully this helps illustrate just how Rubrik is extending its on-premises immutability into AWS by leveraging S3 ObjectLock. By utilizing this feature, customers are able to ensure that once data is written by Rubrik, whether it be on premises within their data centers or archived up to AWS for long-term storage, their data will always be available and always be the same way it was at the time the backup was taken. All right. Cool here. Oh, let me jump back here. So to kind of wrap up, I do want to mention a few more things. First up, Rubrik goes well beyond just telling you that we can really help you recover from ransomware. We actually put our reputation and, more importantly, some dollars behind it now. So for those customers that purchase our Enterprise Edition and adhere to all the data security best practices that we have, they could definitely take advantage of our ransomware recovery warranty, which could entitle them, up to $5 million of recovery expenses. So this is, a pretty big and unique sort of offering that we have out there. I don't know of anyone else doing this. And, this has really sparked up from organizations not being able to, leverage, cyber threat insurance and different things like that. So we're actually offering this up to our customers to sort of stand behind our product and everything else. Next, Lang's Building Supplies. Again, this is just one of many customer case studies that we have up on Rubrik.com that we've helped recover from ransomware. So Lang's was hit with a ransomware attack. The IT guy comes in, he looks at a note, sitting on one of the servers looking for $15 million in order to decrypt, a bunch of essential services that hit their business. And, Lang's, with Rubrik's help, had that blast radius determined and had some essential services back up and running within an hour. And to be honest, they were fully functional within 24 hours. So this is all while not occurring data loss, not having to pay ransom and everything like that whatsoever. So you can check out their full story on the website along with many, many more. I encourage you to do that. Speaking of who are those customers, well, we have over 3,000 of them, or 3,600 of them. So this is sort of the customary Nascar slide with all the logos. All of these guys are using Rubrik to help with their data security needs. And you can see we stretch across a ton of different Fed and education, technology, retail, all of that. And the analysts, they're all behind us as well. It's not just our customers that speak for Rubrik, the analysts have as well. We've been, a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant, as well as the Forrester Wave as well as for the past 5 years, being listed on Forbes Cloud 100. So with all that, I hope you can see just how the, Rubrik can work in your environment and, help, secure your data. So with that, I think we have some time for some questions now. So I'll pass it off to David and we can go.
Absolutely. Yeah. A great presentation. Really cool demo, Mike. Thank you so much. We do have some questions here for the audience or from the audience. And the first one I'll start off with is, let's see, this one from Ted, who's asking, what makes Rubrik's recovery from a ransomware attack faster than other solutions? Kev?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. There's two real components here. First is that kind of machine learning that we've got, so we can help identify when you have that attack. So you're not waiting for the ransom note to land on your desk. You can have that confidence that you're going to be able to pick that up as quickly as possible. And the second thing really is the logical air gap. So because we have this logical air gap where our backup data is not available directly on the network, everything's got to go through our authorization, our authentication process before you can get access to any of that data. Once that data is written to Rubrik, it cannot be amended, so we have that immutability. So we have all of that data there ready to go. You're not having to deal with pulling some tapes back from another location and then hope that you've got the right tape, load that all in, read that in. And then, you also don't have to find, go through all of those different tapes so you know exactly which tape has got that virtual machine or that application and the specific backup that you want to recover. So we have all that indexing in there as well. So those are really the kind of key areas where Rubrik really brings it to the table in helping you get back up and running. And as I'm sure you saw with what Mike was just saying about Langs, they were back up and running super, super quickly. Hope that answers your question, Ted.
Absolutely. Yeah, great answer. Really cool stuff you all are doing at Rubrik there with AWS. Let's see, here's another question. They're asking, this one's for you, Peter. They want to know, once an object is locked, is there any way to unlock it manually?
There requires a specific special permission to override the lock itself. What we're using here is what's known as compliance mode of our ObjectLock solution here. So in that mode, those objects written with compliance mode can have a user with specific special permissions that can modify that retention period. But you have to have that special specific permission in order to do that in compliance mode.
Okay. Excellent. And then another question here. I lost it for a second. Bradford is asking, this one's for you, Mike. When Rubrik is engaged after a ransomware event where the product was not utilized, what layer of security is most frequently at fault? What have you seen?
That's a tough one. I can't think of any situation where we've been engaged after ransomware where they don't utilize us, but I can talk about where we have been utilized. And quite often, organizations have all their perimeters in place and they're doing great jobs at, detecting and blocking some of this stuff. But quite often, what I've been seeing is things like MFA not being enabled on certain things. And then we see compromised Active Directory accounts, which end up being a culprit, which is, odd, but it's, as soon as you gain someone's password and you're doing things as them, that kind of slips under the radar, especially if they can hold that for a while. So we do have products like in our sensitive data discovery, we can detect, ownership changes and different things like that and report on different things, as in terms to ACLs on the files. So, that does help with investigation a little bit as well. If you see a number of changed files and then you go look at them and say, oh, this, M. Preston account for some reason is the owner of all these super secret financial files, maybe something's going on. So definitely, not enabling MFA and not, small little things that you can do that really go a long way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice. That's good insight. This is a good question. They're asking, does using Rubrik with S3 ObjectLock have an associated extra cost? Peter?
So that does have an additional cost for every lock that you place that's considered an API, a put API from S3. So there is a cost associated with that. And I'll provide a link to the pricing page here for the large. We basically bundle up all of the API requests into a specific cost model. And I'll provide that link here in the chat. But yes, there is.
Okay. Excellent. This is an interesting one, Garnet. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but great question. They're asking, is Rubrik's ransomware protection designed primarily with Amazon S3 in mind, or can it be extended to other AWS cloud services?
Yeah, I can take that one. So from the very first version of our product, basically we, I should say not from, but the very first version of our product, what we did was we backed up VMware VMs and we archived off to S3. So AWS has been built into our product, from day zero, essentially. But, our protection goes far beyond just S3, right? So if you want to look at other AWS services, we can back up and restore things like EC2. We can back up and restore RDS, and then we do have integration into other clouds as well.
Excellent. All right. And then another question here. I know you mentioned the ransomware guarantee, Mike. Bradford is also asking, when it comes to that guarantee, I believe is what he's referring to, does Rubrik certify enterprise installations, or how do you know that they've, kind of put the proper steps for security in place?
Sure. Yeah. So with the warranty, there is a number of obviously terms and conditions like there is with everything. So I would encourage just go to rubrik.com/warranty, because there is, certain security best practices that we have to have in place, and, certain things that need to happen both pre-attack and post-attack, if that makes sense. So check that. I think it's rubrik.com/warranty, I think is the actual URL where you can get all that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And then what about this question here? They're asking, is there some way to automate the entire process of creating archives, Mike?
I'll answer that one as well, since I'm a developer advocate. But yeah, there definitely is. So I talked about day zero backing up VMware VMs and archiving to S3, but from day zero as well, we've always taken an API first approach to our product. So every single thing that's done within the UI can be accomplished by calling an underlying API. So, and you don't have to do that with a raw API. You could go ahead, you could use our PowerShell module or a Python SDK. There's a Go SDK. There's support for, all of the new fun and fancy things like Ansible and Terraform and all that stuff as well. So definitely, yes, we can automate anything that can be done within the Rubrik product. And when it comes to archives, yep, for sure, because AWS, has that same approach. There's APIs for everything. So.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we're really running out of time here in our webinar presentation timeline, but really excellent presentations, really cool demo. Mike, Peter, and Kev, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. Thanks everyone for taking the time.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you to, of course, AWS and Rubrik for supporting us here on the event today. I learned a lot about, extending Rubrik Zero Trust data security to AWS. I hope that you did as well. For additional information, check out those 3 PDF resources that you can download there in your audience console. Absolutely, you must check out the Rubrik AWS Customer Lookbook. It's like the coolest case study document I've ever seen. So make sure that you download that one before you go. And then before we wrap it up, I do need to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. This is going out to Jacob Zymut from Michigan. Congratulations. Jacob Z from Michigan will reach out to you. We'll also be reaching out to our best question prize winner as well. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar today, and I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.